Hello everyone, in this video we're going to cover all the fundamentals of JavaScript. By the end of this video you'll have a solid understanding of JavaScript and should feel comfortable enough to start building simple applications. We move pretty fast, so I'm including a set of practice exercise and solution files for everything we cover. I highly recommend you do the exercises so you can solidify your understanding. Also be sure to check out the more advanced tutorials on promises and the prototype chain, which are linked in the description. And lastly, this video requires no previous experience, and it may be a little helpful to have some HTML and CSS, but nothing is mandatory. All right, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is make a Hello World application for JavaScript, and we're going to need a text editor. I'll be using Sublime Text. Just kidding, I'll be using Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever text editor you want, or see the video on how to install Sublime Text if you need help with that. But we're going to open up a web browser and we're going to type in HTML shell, and it should bring us to this website here with a shell of HTML code. So we can just copy this, and then open up our text editor. So I'm going to right click and open up this JavaScript -course file or folder with my text editor. Okay, and it's opened up, and then I'm going to create a folder for our entire project, and I'm going to call it Hello World. Okay, and then in here we can make a file, and we're going to make it index.html. And then I'm going to right click and make another one, and I'm going to call it script.js. And then just for fun, we're going to make a style.css file as well. And then we're going to know that this code is kind of hooked up by seeing the style.css. So I'm going to make just some quick change. So I'm going to make the background to a yellow-green, and I'll hit save. And then we can paste that code that we copied a while back into the editor. And so from here, we can add in our scripts and our style sheets. So we have a style sheet called style.css, and we can link to that style sheet by using this link rel equals style sheet href. And so this one links to style sheet.css. So let's move it. Let's change this name to style.css. Save, and then in our body tag we'll type in hello world 1, 2, 3. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to open up a window in our browser or a new tab, and I'm going to drag and drop this index.html file into our page. I hit enter and make it hello world 1, 2, 3. Okay, and so we don't have any JavaScript yet, and we can also see the background color has changed, so that is a good sign that our style sheets are working. But as far as our JavaScript, we don't have anything. So let's figure that out. And the first thing is in our HTML, we want to add a script tag. So we can do that in a variety of places. You can do it up here in the head tag. So I can do script src equals and then script.js, the name of the JavaScript file, and then a closing script tag. So if I hit save, nothing's going to show up because we don't have anything here in our script tag or in our script file. So let's do a console.log hello world. Save, and then if I right click in the browser, inspect, and go to our console, we still don't see anything, but if we refresh the page, we see hello world. And so our JavaScript code is being executed because it's being pulled into the HTML file with this script tag. And so there's a couple ways to do this. We can also do it inside of the body tag. So inside of here, we can add another script tag. So let's try that. We'll say script, and then we'll say src equals script2.js, and then a closing script tag, and then we'll save this, and now we need to make a script2.js file because we don't have one yet. So I'm going to right click in our hello world, and I'm going to say new file, script2.js, and you'll notice that they're all on the same level inside of the hello world folder, so that where they're located on your computer does make a difference on whether it'll work or not. So anyway, let's make something into this script2.js file. I'll say console.log goodbye cruel world. Save, and then I refresh, and it works here as well. So we can see that both script files are being pulled in and being run in this index.html file. So the next thing is let's try to add some code inside of the script tag. So I'm going to say console.log scriptception. Didn't work because I don't think you can do 2 in 1. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to refresh the page, and it doesn't work. But the interesting thing is if you get rid of this script2.js, we'll save, refresh, and it does work. So you can actually just have inline JavaScript in your index.html file as well. So that's kind of neat. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this back, script2.js, save, and then below this we'll add one more script just to kind of be complete. So you can always come back to this example here. So this script tag without an src, we can run inline JavaScript. So I'm going to say, this time I'm going to store a variable. We haven't talked about variables yet, but it's pretty simple. So I'm going to say let pi equals I am a pi. And then we're going to console.log I like pi. And then plus the variable pi. So now if we hit save and refresh, we see I like pi, I am a pi. And so this script tag is running as well. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the locations of the files. So right now, our hello world, everything is inside the same exact folder. So let's go ahead and duplicate this project. And I think I'm actually using a special tool. You can, if you don't have that in your text editor, then you can just go here to your file manager, right click, copy, paste, and then rename. And so the one that we're going to name this is, I'm going to call this location of files. Okay, and then we can see here location of files shows up. So I'm going to close all those out, and we're going to start in here now. So now let's pull in this location of files index.html into our web browser. But before we do that, let's make a nested folder. So I'm going to create a new folder inside a location of files, and I'm going to call it nested. Okay, and then I'm going to move the index.html into here. So now if I drag and drop this index.html file, you can see here's the name of it, location of files /nested /index.html. Hit enter, and now nothing works. All we get is I like pi, I am a pi. And that's because that's our inline JavaScript. So we have broken files because the index.html can't find them. So let's figure that out. So if we go into our project we can see index.html is trying to find the script.js file. And so we have our index.html, but the script is back a folder. So it's outside of nested. It's outside of this current folder. So we got to go backwards and then into script. So how do we do that? How do we go backwards? You do that by doing a // So if we do // script, so ... then we see the script file. So if I hit save, then we should be able to get this hello world. So if I refresh, we can see hello world. So we're good. And now let's try to move the script to, just because. So let's say the script 2 is not here, but it's in nested, and then there's another folder called nested2. So this script 2 is the opposite direction. It's inside of the nested2 folder, which is inside of nested. So if we look at our file manager, location of files, we have nested, we have our index.html file. So from here, we need to figure out how do we get to the script2 file. We go into our nested2, and then there it is. So how do we get into the nested2? Well, we do that by just saying / and then the name of the folder, and then the name of the file that we're looking for. So we'll save that, refresh, and there we go. So now we get the nested2 file. We're still missing the style.css, so let's go ahead and fix that real quick. And so I'll let you try to figure that out on your own, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. So pause the video and try to figure it out. This one's very simple. We just add a dot to go back a directory. So, and the reason again is because we have our index.html and our style.css is a back a folder. So we go / to go back, and then style.css. So we save, refresh, and there we go. Everything works. So that is how you go backwards and forwards. And if you have multiple like folders that you need to jump, you can do that as much as you need. I'm going to take a quick break to make a starting folder, so we can just copy and paste this starting folder to make a new project. So I'm going to copy this hello world, and then I'm going to paste it to make a hello world copy, and then I'm going to rename it starter. Then we're going to get rid of some of the unnecessary stuff. So we don't need a script 2 normally, and I'm just going to change this to aqua just because. Save, and then in our index.html, I want to get rid of the script 2. I'm going to get rid of the inline script, and then I'm going to give it a helpful message here. I'm going to say open DevTools console to see JavaScript running, just to give us a little hint of where the code is actually at. And then we can look at this script.js. I think we are good. So this is a good starting folder. So now anytime we want to learn something new, we'll just copy, paste, and then rename it. In this section, we're going to talk about the order of files and script files being inserted into the index.html file. And so first of all, ignore these. I accidentally did this video a little later than I wanted to, so just ignore all this, and we're going to use the starter folder to make a new folder. We're going to call this one order-matters, and we can go ahead and open it up. And we're going to change this script file to be called failed script.js. And then we're going to make another JS file called changeptag.js. And so we're going to be manipulating the DOM just to show you this issue that we're going to talk about. And so we're going to cover the DOM later. So just ignore kind of like what we're doing and try to understand the concept. And we'll talk about the details later. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the index.html file, and we are going to create a script tag, or we're going to use this script tag here at the bottom of, okay, we actually don't have one at the bottom. So let's make another script. So script src equals, we're going to call this change p tag.js. And we're going to close the script. And then we're going to call this one failed script.js. Okay, so we have the failed script up at the top of the head file, or at the bottom of the head tag, and then the script, the change p tag script at the end of the body section. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our body and we're going to make some p tags, and this p is just going to have some text that says my script is trying to change me before I exist, so it fails. And this p is going to have an ID attribute of failed, and then we're going to make another p tag, and this one's going to have the ID of test ID, and it says I am a paragraph with the ID of test ID. Okay, so now we can manipulate these with our JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the change p tag. So we're going to go into here and we're going to grab the HTML element. So this test ID here, we can actually grab it by the ID. And so we can use this document.getElement by ID and pass in an ID. So we're going to pass in test ID because that is the ID of this paragraph tag that we're trying to grab. So now we can store it in a variable. So I'm going to say let p tag equals document.getElement by ID. And so we're going to talk about all of this in more detail. I'm just showing you that the order is important. So just bear with me a moment. So we're going to say p tag.style.background equals hot pink. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to drag this index.html file, ignore all that, and just open up a new tab and drag the index.html file into the web browser. And so now we can see that the JavaScript is changing the background of this paragraph tag to a different color. So if we get rid of this and save, the background color is not changed. So that was a comment, just 2 slashes. So we can actually change the look and feel of the website with JavaScript. So let's try it again with this failed script. So you'll see that this failed script is loaded up here. So let's go up to our failed script, and we're gonna do the same thing with the failed ID. So I'm gonna say let p tag failed equals document.getElement by ID. I'm gonna grab the failed element, or the element with the ID of failed, and we're going to say p tag failed dot style dot background equals purple. So is this going to work or not? So look here, it should grab this paragraph tag and change its background to purple. So let's refresh, and we get some weird error. Cannot read properties of null reading style. So what that means is and it also looks at failed script line 3. So we go to failed script line 3. Here's where the error is. So it's saying that style is null. Cannot read properties of null. So style is null. Sorry, actually p tag failed is what's null. And the reason for that is because we are loading this failed script up here in this head tag. And down here is where the ID is actually like created. So what's happening is we're trying to run this script before the element that this script relies on is even created. So we're trying to grab an ID or a paragraph tag with a specific ID that doesn't exist yet. It doesn't exist until after this paragraph tag is created. So if we take this script tag here and we move it down here, I'll save and refresh, and now it works because this gets created first. So that is what I wanted to show you, is that the order of which script tags are created and JavaScript files are imported does matter. So you want to typically grab your JavaScript files and import them after all the HTML is loaded. So that's why the best place to put your JavaScript imports generally is at the end of the body tag. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this section. In this next section, I want to talk about data types, and please ignore if these folders don't line up perfectly with yours. I accidentally did a couple of these out of order. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this starter folder and we're going to paste it to make a new project. We're going to rename it data-types, and then we'll open it up. Okay, and now I can open that up, drag and drop the index.html, enter, and now we get open DevTools console to see JavaScript running, and we get hello world. So now and this is in our data types folder, so we can start learning about data types here in that folder. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with data types is strings. So you can do console.log, hello, I am a string. You know, we've already been working with strings and we didn't even know it. So you can also store these in variables. So I'm going to say let my string equals I am a string or text. And I'll hit semicolon, save. Well, and then nothing's going to happen because this string here is stored in the myString variable, but we can use that variable. So we can say console.log myStringVal : and then a plus the variable. So it's going to print out myStringVal plus whatever is stored in the myString variable. And what do we store in myString variable? Well, myString equals I am a string or text. So if I save this and refresh, we get hello, I am a string from this here, and then myStringVal, I am a string or text, which is here. myStringVal, I am a string or text, because again, this text here is stored in this variable and we're trying to print this variable as well. So that's how strings work. You can also define a variable and you don't have to tell JavaScript what is inside of it yet. So we can just say let define later, and then it's just an undefined variable. So let's go ahead and console log that just to see what we get. So undefined, or define later plus define later. So we'll save that and then take a look at what we get. So we get NaN, so not a number. Let's try to do, oops. Okay, that's my JavaScript or my code editor automatically formatting. But let's try to also console.log define later. We'll save and refresh and we get undefined. So these are all kind of like falsy values or like empty values. And so depending on how you use them, it's going to show up differently. So if we just console.log define later, it's going to show up undefined. And I'm pretty sure not a number is because we're using this plus. So there's other ways to format strings, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's go ahead and keep going. So the point is that we can define this variable later. So if I say define later is equal to, it's gonna be a string now, exclamation point, and a semicolon, and then I console log define later again, save, we refresh, and now we get it's going to be a string now. And we can see that that is printed from JavaScript's line 15, or script.js's line 15. So we see here we're printing define later, it's going to be a string now. So it was undefined, it was not a number, now it's going to be this string that it's been assigned. So that's pretty much how that works with defining the variables. And then the next, okay, so now let's talk about the handling strings. So I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to say first part of string dot space, and then you can add another chunk, or like a thing, you know, a variable, data type, or whatever, after the comma. So I'm going to say my string, and then comma again, and then another string, third part. So I save that, and then refresh, and we get here, first part of string, I am a string dot dot dot, or text, which is the value of this my string variable. And then at the end, after the comma, we add a space and a third part string. So we get this third part. So that's one way to print out a string. Another way, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that, duplicate this line. Another way is through the plus, which we've already seen. So instead of a comma, you can say plus. And so you can think of this as like a concatenating strings, or adding them together, you know, connecting them. So plus, here we go. So save, refresh, and we get the same thing, almost. I think there's a space missing or something, but it's pretty much the same thing. So that's another way to print a string. And then the other way, this one's kind of the easiest, I think, or the most practical in a lot of times, is where instead of using the quotes, you use the backticks, and that'll be found usually at the top left of your keyboard. It's these little things. And now we can say first part of string, period, and then when you want to insert a value in like a variable or a const, you can do that with a $, and then opening curly bracket and closing curly bracket, and then you can put the value or the variable that needs to be evaluated inside of these brackets. So if I do my string and then third part of string, save, refresh, and we get first part of string, period, space, and then immediately it prints the value here. So it evaluates it and then sticks it into this string. And this is nice because you don't have to end the quotes and then add a plus sign or a comma and then remake another set of quotes. It's all just nested into this one. So that's pretty helpful. And another one is that you can, like, let's say you have quotes and you want to have a quote in here, like, so somebody is saying, you know, quoting something. You want to have a quote. So let's say the cat says meow, right? And you want to say meow. Well, you can't do that because you'd be closing the quotes. So if you want to say meow, you'd have to add I don't know if this is a / or a backslash, but it starts at the top and then it moves to the right and as it goes down. So meow, and then we'll add another slash and then quotes. There we go. So now let's see what happens here. We'll save that, refresh, and here we get a string that says the cat says meow, and we can actually add the quotes in. So if you try, oh, okay, it automatically formatted to use single quote strings, unfortunately. Let me comment this, and I'll save it. So, and that's another solution. So hopefully your text editor won't automatically fix that, because this can sometimes be an issue. So anyway, just use these little slashes to be able to escape, so you can use the quotes inside of quotes. And another way is what our text editor did for us, where it uses the single quote inside of the, like on the outside, and then double quotes on the inside. But then the problem here is that you can't use single quotes. So, and he's, okay, so we just broke it because we have a single quote here. So if we want to use a single quote inside of the single quotes, we'll have to use that little slash to escape it. A nice kitty. Save, refresh. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So that is different ways to handle strings. And then there's also other data types like numbers. So we can use a variable to store a number as well. So I'm going to say let my age equals 47. And so we'll save that. Well, I'm going to say this is a type of number. And then we can say, you know, I am currently this many years old. So we'll say console.log, and again, we can do it a variety of ways. So I am currently my age years old. Save, refresh. It says I am currently 47 years old. So you can operate on different data types in different ways. So for example, because this is a type of number, you know, you can use math on numbers. You can't really use math on strings. What does it mean to say string plus 3? That doesn't make sense. But 47 plus 3 does make sense. So let's say my age plus plus. And this is a shorthand way of saying increase the my age variable by 1. So now we'll say I am currently this many years old. So it says I'm currently 47, and now we've done some math, we've done some addition on this variable. And so there's other ways to do this. You can say my age plus equals 1. Or you can say my age is equal to my age plus 1. And so this guy is currently aged 3 years. So now we go from 47 to 50 years old. So you can use math on numbers, basically. The next thing we'll talk about is Booleans. And so Booleans are either a true or a false value. And those can be used in a lot of ways to test whether or not to do a specific thing. So we're going to set a variable called myBool, and we're going to set it equal to false. And then we can console.log what this variable is. So myBool is, and myBool. So if we save that and take a look, we get myBool is false. And so we have a falsy value, so we can do things with it. And the next thing is arrays. Well, we'll talk about more about Booleans later. But the next thing is arrays, and these are basically lists of different things. So we can do let my array, this is the variable name, and we'll set it equal to, and then the array syntax is just 2 straight brackets. And so you would put the list of things in this straight brackets, separating each thing by commas. So we can have an array of animals, and we can say cats, elephants and dogs or whatever. And then if you want to print that array, you can print the entire array, or you could print out just a single element. And arrays have an index value, which is basically their position in the array, and arrays start counting as 0. So this cats element has a index of 0, and then elephants has an index of 1, etc. And so you can get specific positions of an array by using the index. So console.log my array, straight brackets, and then 0 would get the cats, because that's the position that the 0 index has as its value. And so we could do 1 and 2, etc. So if I'm gonna save this and refresh, here we are, we're printing out the entire array here, and then here we're just getting cats, the very first element, or the 0th element, and then here the first element, or technically the second element in the array at the index of 1 is elephants. So it prints out cats and elephants. So line 41 and line 42, 41 and 42. So that's a very simple introduction on arrays. The next thing after that is objects. And so an object is basically a group of smaller properties. So we can have let my object to be the variable name, and we'll set it equal to an object. And the objects are created by these curly brackets. And the curly brackets will contain all of the properties of the object. So if we wanted to make like a person object, we could give them an age property. And so these are full of key value pairs. So the thing on the left side would be the key, and then the thing on the right side would be the value. So age would be the key, and then 29 in this example would be a value. So we have the myObject's age property has a value of 29. And then we could give this human an age, a gender, or whatever you want. So let's do occupation. And then you can also nest objects within objects. So we could say location has a zip code of 12345 and a state of New York and a city of, I don't know, let's say Flagstaff. I know that's not a city in New York most likely, but we'll just say that. So we have location, etc. So we can also add functions. We haven't talked about functions yet, but let's just go ahead and do this. We'll talk about functions very soon. So we'll say increment age is a function on this myObject property. And we're going to say we can increment this person's age. And so we're going to talk about this later on, but we'll just give a quick example here. As a function, this myObject has this increment age function, which takes the age of this object and increases it by 1. And again, we're going to talk about this much later in much more depth, so don't worry too much about it. And let's say they have a favorite animals list. Cows, dolphins, unicorns. So this person's object has a favorite animals list with this array. And so now we can console.log the entire object. So object is my object. So we're printing out this entire object here. So let's save, refresh, and so now we have this entire object. And then we can also print out or do things with the object. So let's say we just want the age. My object.age, save, we should get 29. And you do, so you take the myObject and then dot and then the property. And you can also do it like this, console.log myObject, and then with quotes, the property name, and that will give us the value. So let's save that, refresh, and we get the object's age property value. So that's how we can like access different properties, and then we can also run this function. So we haven't talked about functions yet, but I'm just gonna show you real quick. So we can do myObject.incrementAge, and then by adding the parentheses on it, we're saying run this function. So I'm gonna run the function that increments the age, and then I'm gonna console.log the myObject.age again. We'll save, refresh, and now we can see that this person is 30 years old. The next thing we're going to talk about is Booleans, and these are basically true and or false, true or false values. So let's go ahead and duplicate our starter project. We're going to copy it, paste. I'm going to close out any existing tabs, rename the starter copy Booleans, and now we have our empty JavaScript file that we can work in. So basically, again, Booleans are true or false values. So we can do a console.log true, and we'll see true printed out in the browser. But let's first grab the index.html file, drag it into our web browser, make sure that the path is correct, and we hit enter. We should see true. You can also compare values. So here in our code, we can test to see whether something is equal to something else. And we can do that with either a double equals or a triple equals. And so the double equals is just like, are they the same value, but they're allowed to be different types? And then the triple equals is more specific. It has to be the same value and the same type. So we'll demonstrate that here. So I'm going to say console.log, and we're going to compare 4 to 6. So in this one, it doesn't matter if you use double or triple, but is 4 equal to 6? The answer is no. So it compares these two, and it returns an evaluation or a response to this like evaluation. So is 4 equal to 6? No. And no would be false. So if we refresh, we get false. The next thing is we can do something like console.log is 4 equal to 4. And this would be true, right? 4 is the same as 4. But is 4 the same as the string 4? So let's hit save and refresh, and we get true. So 4, the number, is equal to 4, the string. But this is where the amount of specificity comes into play. So if we copy this and we do a triple equals, is the number 4 the same as the string 4? If we hit save, we get false. And that's because, yes, the values are the same, but the types are different. This one's a number and this one's a string. So JavaScript knows that what it's looking at here inside the string can convert into a number. So it will give it false because they have to be the same type and the same value. So that's pretty much how that works. And let's actually take a look at all of the different types of things that we can compare and see if, see what returns true and what returns false. We can do that by typing in Boolean JavaScript in Google, and we get this Boolean page. We click on it. Here's the documentation for JavaScript, and here it says that 0, -0, null, false, NaN or not a number, undefined, and the empty string all evaluate to false. And then anything else, including an empty array, or the string false, or the string true as well, those all evaluate to true. So everything else but these things evaluate to false. So now if we go into our code, we can test that. We can say, let's make a test object. So test object equals, let's actually just make it an empty object. And we can actually pass this into the Boolean like function, and we haven't covered that too much yet, but we can pass this in here to see if it's a true or false Boolean. Because if we were to just print out test object, it would just print out the contents of the object. But we want to know if this evaluates to true or false. So that's why we have to pass it into the Boolean function. So I'm going to say Boolean test obj. And then we're going to console.log this. So console.log, I'm going to put a parentheses here and a parentheses here. Save. And then let's go back to the page. We'll refresh and we get true on line 10. So line 10 here, the Boolean of test object, an empty object, evaluates to true. And then let's copy this and paste it. And I'm going to say false. And so this is exactly what the documentation was showing us. False evaluates to true because it's inside of a string. But if you take it out of a string, now it's just a Boolean, it's going to evaluate to false. So refresh and false. So you can look at the documentation to see what evaluates to true and what evaluates to false. We can also test for multiple conditions to be true or false. So say somebody needs to be, like in order to enter a bar, you need to be 21 and you have to have enough money to pay the entrance fee. So you have multiple things that need to be true in order for you to be able to get in. So you can do that, something like that, by using the or conditional or the and conditional. So with the two bars, these two vertical lines, that would mean that either of these cases would need to be true. And then in the and, then we would need both cases to be true. And so what happens is you put a condition that evaluates to true or false on each side. So you could say something like console.log, and we could say 4 is equal to 4, or 8 is greater than 3. So here, does either of these evaluate to true? So with the string 4 equaling the number of 4, because it's a triple equals, this is going to evaluate to false. So this side evaluates to false. So what about this side over here? 8 is greater than 3, so this whole entire thing should evaluate to true. So when I go here and refresh, we can see that line 14 says true. So let's look at the code. 14, so this is equal to false, but on this side it's equal to true. 8 is greater than 3. So as long as one of these is true, this expression will evaluate to true. And that's what it does, because we can see here, true on line 14. So let's try an and conditional now. And I forgot to mention comments. Comments are just the 2 slash marks. So let's do a console.log 4 equal 4 and 8 is greater than 3. So we'll try this and refresh, and we get false. And that's because with the ands, we need both of these to be true. So that is how you can compare. And you can also nest. So you could do something like, you could add parentheses around this 8 and 3, and then add another conditional. So you can nest as deep as you want, but and then the whole thing would, either evaluate to true or false. So that is using Booleans and conditionals. So let me go ahead and get rid of these parentheses here. Okay, and that should work. So console.log, the string 4 is equal to the number 4. That is false. And so yeah, this string is this expression is back to where it needs to be. And if we refresh, this works. In this video, we're going to talk about comments, and it's something that I've been using a little bit here and there, and so I want to make an official video on it, or a section. So let's go ahead and copy the starter, and we're going to paste and rename comments, and get rid of that. And so we'll start over. Okay, so here in our script file, we have two different things that we can do, two ways to make comments. So the first is just 2 slashes. You can see how it grays out. And then the other option is, well, let's make a multi-line comment. So function hello console.log. Okay, so this is on 3 lines. So how do we comment out multiple lines at once? Well, you could do slashes on each of them, or you could do a multi-line comment. So multi-line comment is a slash star, and then to close the comment, it's a star slash. And so console.log hello. And so we can see these are working. And then if we drag this index, oops, what happened there? If we drag this index file in here, we can see that this hello world isn't running, only the 2 hellos. And then this function isn't defined either because it's a comment. So anyway, that's comments. Now that we've covered Booleans, we can actually use those Booleans to make conditional code. So a code that gets run conditionally. So let's go ahead and copy the starter project. We're going to paste it, and I'm going to name this Conditionals. And then in here, we're going to go into our script. We're actually going to make more than one script file, but we'll just start with the script for now. So what I'm going to say, let's actually get the code running in the browser first. Okay, so I'm going to drag and drop the index.html of the conditionals in here and inspect. Okay, so now we've got our console tab open and we can run some code. So the first thing I want to do is I want to say, like, I'm just going to make a variable. I'm going to say let current time equals 1400. And then I'm going to say let Susie age, I should make this capital, equals 19. And so now we can use a conditional. So like, let's say we have a bar, an electronically, bouncer. So we can say if Susie age is less than 21, then console.log access denied because you're under 21. So if, and then this thing in the parentheses evaluates to true, then we run this code. So let's go ahead and save this and refresh. Oops, and we get Susie age is not defined. Let's make it capital. Refresh. This is access denied because you're under 21. Okay, and so this is a less than sign. And so we've got Susie age, and the value stored in this variable is 19. So if 19 is less than 21, then run this code here. So that's how that works. And then you can also do less than or equal to, but we're just going to keep it as less than for now. So now let's make another person in this application. We'll say let Bob age equals 34. And so now we're going to say if Bob age is less than or equal to 21, then we'll just say console.log access denied And then otherwise, console.log access granted. So we'll save, and then what do you think is going to run? So we have a Bob age. The value stored in this variable is 34. So if 34 is less than or equal to 21, then print access denied. Else, print access granted. And so what is the value of Bob age? It's 34. Is 34 less than or equal to 21? So I like to read it just kind of like out loud. So 34 is less than or equal to 21. That is a false statement. So this is going to be the code that's going to most likely run. So let's give it a try, and we see access granted. So we can see these if-else statements that we can use, and this is how we can kind of like create a bunch of different ways that an application can run. So we can also use the or thing that we had a while back in our Booleans. So like this or and this and to make multiple conditions need to be true. So I'm going to say if Susie age is greater than or equal to 21, or the current time is less than 1600, then console.log access granted because the bar is closed. And then otherwise, console.log bar is open, so you gotta be older than 21. Save, and then now let's run this and see what happens. So we get access granted because the bar is closed. So the current time is 1400, and 1400 is less than 1600. So this half of this or conditional is true. So we don't even need this one to be true. So if either of these are true, then we'll run this. If both of these are false, then we'll run this. And so that's how the or conditional works. And then we can use the and to make both of them required. You can also have multiple ways to do these conditionals. So you can say like if, else if, else if, else if. You can have like 4 or 5 chained conditional statements. So let's demonstrate that. And we'll start by creating a Susie object. So Susie obj equals, and then we'll say age is 19 and $7. And I'm going to make a comment for age of 22 just to demonstrate a truthy value, or like, a different situation. So I'm going to say if Susie obj dot age is greater than or equal to 21, and Susie obj dot dollars is greater than or equal to 5, then console.log welcome to the club, Susie. Else if, so if she has the money required and she's old enough, then we can get her into the bar. So Susie obj.age is less than 21. So if this isn't true, then one of them is false. So we can check the age. So we'll say console.log you are not old enough. And then, so if Susie's age is less than the required age, then she's not old enough. And maybe she is old enough, but she doesn't have enough money. So you can say else if Susie obj dot dollars is less than 5, we'll say 5 is the minimum required. You could say console.log you don't have enough cash. And the final else without the else if, this would cover all of the other cases. So I'm just going to say console.log. This is for when all other conditionals fail. And you have to be careful because the very first conditional statement that gets run and evaluated to true is going to be the one that gets run. So within these parentheses, if this is true, it's going to run and it's not going to do any of these. So if you have something that is more specific below, then that may not ever run, even though that's the one that you wanted to run. So be careful with the order. And then the next thing we'll talk about is the not operator. So you can use an exclamation point to turn something into the opposite of what it is. And so I'll demonstrate that by setting a variable of hungry equals to true. And then we'll say if not hungry, then console.log go climb. Otherwise, console.log eat and then climb. So we'll save. And so I like to read this as a not. So hungry is true. And so if not true, then go climb. So is this going to run? Well, they are hungry. And so this can be basically evaluated to not true. So if not true, then go climb. Oops. So let's just see if this runs. And a lot of times it's hard for me to process in my brain, so I'll just like run it and then I'll just do the opposite if it doesn't work the way that I'm expecting it to. So you got to play around with it and just kind of get a feel for it. But let's refresh. Okay. And so it says eat and then climb because they are hungry. So hopefully that makes sense. This is the not operator. It makes this the opposite of what it is. So if it's true, it should be false. So this is basically the inside these parentheses is evaluating to false because hungry is true. It makes it opposite. It negates it. Hopefully that makes sense. You just got to play around with it. And the and or operators apply. You can nest them and use as many as you want. So we'll do one more quick example. So if true and parentheses, true or false, and true, then this is gross, but you can do it. So let's actually take a closer look at it. So we have this as the entire conditional, and then we have a nested conditional. So if true or false, and that is true, so this turns into true. So if true and true and true, then this is gross, but you can do it. So this should evaluate to true. So let's refresh. This is gross, but you can do it. So hopefully that all makes sense. That's conditionals in a nutshell. And the next thing that we can talk about is there's a switch and ternary statements that we can do. So I'm going to right click, make a new JS file, and I'm going to call it switch.js. And then inside of it, we're going to make some quick code. I'm going to say let fave season equals summer. And basically what's going to happen here is it finds the case that matches the expression in switch. And it stops when it reaches a break. So let's look at an example. So I'm going to say switch fave season, and we're going to say case winter, and console.log, wow, what a dumb season to like. It's too cold. And I'm going to say break. Okay, and then we're going to make case for fall, console.log, leaves everywhere, break, and then case summer, console.log, oops, let's get rid of the quotes, console.log, too hot break, and case spring console.log, it is a spring break, and then we also have a default case. So, oops. So console.log, something is wrong with your input, question mark. We'll hit a semicolon. Okay, so basically what we have is a switch statement. And let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. But first of all, we need to include this into our index.html. So we have a script.js. I'm going to copy and paste this. I'm going to comment out the script, and I'm going to turn on the switch statement. And I think, wait, oh, there it is, switch.js. Okay, so save. Now I'm going to refresh, and it says too hot. And so why does it say too hot? Let's look at the code. So we get the fave season is summer, so it's testing each case against the switch. So fave season is summer, so in the case of this being winter, print this and break, but it's not winter, fave season is summer, so this one doesn't work, but this one does. So case summer, it matches the switch, so we're going to print too hot. And then it says break. So that's all that's going to be printed. So let's try winter. So I'm going to copy and paste this. And I'm going to get rid of the breaks. So I'm going to get rid of that one, get rid of this one, get rid of this one, and get rid of this one. So there's no breaks in this second switch. And then I'm going to change the fave season to be winter. So let's save it. Now refresh. And now we get a whole bunch of stuff. So why are we getting so much stuff? Well, let's take a look. So fave, first of all, it does what we did up here. But then second, it switches fave season to winter. And then it tests against the fave season variable. So it's winter. And at the very beginning, we find a matching case. So it says winter, so it prints out this console log statement. And because there's no break, it's going to print this one, and this one, and this one, because nowhere is there a break. And then it says something is wrong with your input. So basically, it's the break statement that exits this switch statement. So if you only want one to print, then you need to make sure you add a break to exit out of the loop or out of this switch. And then let's copy and paste again. And I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to say fave season is now fall. And then we're going to switch fave season, case winter, that can stay the same, case fall, case summer, too hot. And let's add a break here. So after too hot, we'll say break. Save. And I'm also going to just add another console.log to help us see where we are at. Okay, so that should help. And let's see here. That should work. So let's refresh. Okay, so we get leaves everywhere and too hot. So what happens? Again, it tests against fave season, which is fall. And then it's not going to run this because winter does not equal fall. But this one matches, so it's going to print leaves everywhere. And then it's still going to keep printing. But it doesn't need to match this anymore because it's already found a match. So it prints too hot, but then here's our break. So it's going to stop here and exit the loop. So that is pretty much how switch statements work. Okay, we got one more thing to cover with conditionals, and that is the ternary. So I'm going to go ahead and comment out switch. I'm going to paste in another one. Well, I'm going to copy it and paste, and then we're going to add in a ternary.js. I'm going to save that in the HTML, and then I'm going to create a new ternary.js file. Okay, and so now we can play around with these, and this is basically just a shorthand way of doing something. So what we can say is true question mark console.log true colon console.log false. And so what exactly is going on here? Basically, we have an expression and then a question mark. So if the expression evaluates to true, then do what's on the left-hand side of the colon. Otherwise, do what's on the right-hand side of the colon. So this particular statement evaluates to true, so we're going to console.log true. And let's refresh, we get true. So that's cool. And you can see it's also a lot shorter, it's all on one line. So if this thing happens, it is true, then run this. Otherwise, run the thing that's on the right-hand side of the colon. And so now let's try something crazy. We can actually nest ternaries, and I don't recommend you usually do this, but you can. So let's say an age variable is equal to 20, and we'll say age is greater than or equal to 21, question mark. So here's the expression, does this evaluate to true? If it does, then you run the thing on the left-hand side of the colon. So let's say console.log, let's go get a drink. And then otherwise, console.log, I'm sorry, actually not that. We want to, so age is greater than or equal to 21 is an expression. If this is true, we run this. If it's false, then we can have, run this code on the right-hand side. So if we're going to nest a ternary, we could put another ternary on this side. So let's say age greater than 17, question mark, console.log, you are an adult but can't drink. Otherwise, console.log, you are a child. So I'm going to save that, and it's going to, well, for me, I'm on Prettier, so it's going to reformat this. So let's take a look and run this line by line. So age is greater than or equal to 21, question mark. So this is an expression. Does it evaluate to true? Age is 20. So it says age is greater than or equal to 21. 20 is not greater than or equal to 21. So this evaluates to, So this evaluates to false. So because this is false, then this code on the left-hand side does not run. It's the code on the right-hand side of the colon that runs. So what is the code on the right-hand side? Well, it's another ternary. So now we're here. Age is greater than 17. Is that statement true or false? This one is true, so it's going to run the code on the left-hand side of the colon. So it's going to run this code here. Console.log, you are an adult but cannot drink. So that is basically how nested ternaries work, and you can play around with that a little bit more, but we got a lot to cover, so I'm going to keep going. And I'm also going to put in some ternary exercises in the exercises files if you want to download those. The next thing I want to talk about is loops. So I'm going to copy the starter folder and paste in a duplicate, and we're going to rename this to loops. Okay, and then we'll open it up and drag the index.html in here, hit enter, and we're back to our hello world, so we can start talking about loops. So I'm going to open up the script.js file, and a loop is something that you can do like over and over and over and over and over again until a condition is false. And so the first loop we're going to run is the simplest, and it's just a simple count up from 0 to 15 or whatever number you want. So we're going to use a for loop for this, and we're going to have a set of parentheses, and then there's going to be 3 little chunks of code in there. The first chunk is going to set the variable of I equal to 0, and then we're going to add a semicolon to signal the next expression, and this portion in the middle is going to be a comparison. So if I is less than 15, and then a semicolon, and then I plus plus. So what this means is that we're setting the variable of I to 0, and then we're checking to see if it's less than 15. If that is true, then we run the loop, and then we increase the value of I by 1. And you could change this to +2 or whatever you want to do, or you could shrink it, whatever you want to do. So and then here inside these curly brackets is the block of code to actually run. So we're going to say console.log, and then current value of I, and a semicolon, and I. And that's it. So let's go ahead and save that and refresh, and then we get current value of I is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 14. And then, so we basically just set I is 0, I is less than 15, so we run this loop, then we increase the value all the way up to I is 14, and then we run the code, and then increase the value, so I is 15, and once I hits 15, 15 is not less than 15, so we stop the loop. But if you wanted to include 15, you would just add the equal sign. So that's how the for loops work, and then we can do a while loop as well, and this is basically saying, like, while something is true, do this. So we're going to say while, and then inside the parentheses, we're going to say, write our expression that we're going to see if it is true or not. So I'm going to say, I want to give it a value. I'm going to make a variable. So we're going to say let num of dogs equals 100. And then we're going to say while num of dogs is greater than 5, do this block of code. And we're going to say console.log, and then we have num of dogs. And then in this while loop, we don't have anything that changes the value, so we would end up doing that manually inside of this while loop. So in the while loop, I'm going to say num of dogs minus equals 2. So we're going to shrink the amount of dogs by 2 every single time we get to this section of code. So let's test it out. Refresh. We're going to see up here, it starts out at we have 100 dogs, then 98, 96, all the way down to 6, because the code has us stop once num of dogs is no longer greater than 5. So at this point, it gets down to 4, and then we stop the loop. And then there's another one where we can do something at least once. And this is a do while loop, and it kind of looks a little bit different. It has the block of code that we actually run first before the testing to see if the block should be run. So we're going to say do, and then the block of code, we're going to say console.log, we have, and then I'm going to do cats this time, so num of cats, too many cats. Okay, and then I'm going to make let num of cats equals 100. Okay, so we're going to print this out while the num of cats is greater than 3. Okay, and then yeah, that we can stop there. So we'll test this out. Refresh, Okay, and it looks like we are in an infinite loop. Oh, it's because I forgot to add something to change the num of cats. So num of cats is always going to be 100, and this while statement is always going to be true. So we need to actually do something to prevent this infinite loop from happening. So I'm going to say while num of cats is greater than 3, we're going to go through this loop, and then we're going to change the value of num of cats. So I'm going to say num of cats minus minus save. And then I might have to close this out. Yeah, so we have an infinite loop, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. Close. Okay, so that's the problem with infinite loops, is they can crash your system. So you want to be careful with that. Let's go ahead and go back to our editor. And I'm in the loops, so I'm going to drag that in, inspect. Hopefully I saved. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now if we scroll up, it starts at we have 100 too many cats. We have 99 too many cats, all the way down to 4. So that's it for loops. You can loop through objects as well, but I'm going to leave that as an exercise for you to do. And there should be some exercises and challenges for you in the downloads. The next thing we're going to do is talk about let and const. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the starter folder again, paste it, and rename to let and const. And then we're going to open this up in our window, our web browser. And then now we have our starting code. So I'm going to open up the script, and we're going to start setting some variables. So the first thing is what we've been doing, which is using let. So let's say we want to set a variable to my age, or a variable name my age, and we want to set it equal to 45. So we can, this is a variable, and we can change the value. So console.log my age, it'll log 45, and then we can my age plus plus, and it'll be 46. So there's another thing called a const, which we cannot change. So const constant age equals, let's say 26. So let's actually log out what we have so far. So I'm going to refresh, and we get 45. So, oh, and I forgot to console log it again, but let's log it after we've increased the age, and we get 45 and 46. So this const we cannot change. So if I console.log constant age, and then try to do constant age plus plus, console.log constant age, it's not going to work. So let's refresh, and we get 26, and then assignment to constant variable. It's an error. It doesn't allow us to change this variable, or this constant. Now, that's actually good because it helps our application be more predictable. And we'll talk about how this can work to actually make it, because it seems like it would be impossible to change a variable name. But the scope matters, and we'll talk about scope when we get to functions. But essentially, constants you can't change, but you can change them with arrays and objects. So let's go ahead and look at that. So we can't change this, but let's close that out. Let's make another file called array.js. So array.js, and let's import array.js into our index.html file. So I'm going to say, array.js, and then here in our array, we can make an array. So I'm going to say const my array equals cats, dogs, elephant. And then I'm going to say console.log my array. Okay, and then I'm going to say my array 0 is equal to kitty. And so we're actually grabbing the 0th index and trying to change its value to kitty. So from cat to kitty. So do you think this is going to work? Let's give it a try. So console.log my array. Okay, let's save it and refresh, and it does work. And let's take a look at the documentation to see why. So I'm just going to say mdn const in Google, and it'll take us to the const page. And it basically says that the value of a constant can't be changed through reassignment, example by using the assignment operator, and it can't be redeclared. However, if a const is an object or array, its properties or items can be updated or removed. And so objects and arrays, they can be updated, but they just can't be reassigned. So we can do something like this. But what we cannot do is something like this. My array equals 1, 2, 3. Because we're completely reassigning it here. So that's not going to be allowed. And arrays and objects work the same or in a similar fashion, so you can update objects in the same way. So we'll say const myObj equals an empty object, and then you can update the object. So you can add properties. So myObj dot hello there equals what's up, and then console.log myObj. So because this isn't just reassigning the entire object, it's just updating the properties. So let's go take a look. Oops, assignment to const variable on line 8. Line 8, oh, my bad. So we'll comment that out, refresh. Okay, and so here we can see that we're able to update objects as well. So that's it for let and const. Now's a good time to start talking about functions. So let's go ahead and copy the starter, paste it into the other folder, and rename it. And we're just going to call it functions. Okay, and then in here, let's go ahead and rename this to function basics. And then I'm going to change the index.html script to function basics.js. Okay, and then in here we can start writing some functions. So a function is basically a way to reuse the same piece of code over and over again. And you can also make it customizable so it can work for different things. So let's just start out with a simple hello world function. So I'm going to say function print hello. And so this is the name of the function, and then inside of these curly brackets is the body. So this is what's going to be run. So console.log hello. Okay, so we have a function called print hello, and what it does is it logs out hello to the console. So how do we get this code to actually run? Well, we call the function. So it's the function is stored in this print hello, but it doesn't actually run until you give it parentheses. So parentheses at the end of a function is what will actually call and execute the function. So if we do this, we'll hit save, we can refresh. Oh, we have to bring in the index.html file, but it's going to print hello from line 2. So it prints hello. And if you want to do it again, it's much quicker this time because we can just add the function as many times as we want to say hello. So 4 times here. So you can see how it's a lot easier than just writing console.log hello 4 times. So that's how we can, that's a very basic function. And you can also do something like give it a parameter. So I'm going to say function print hello 2, and I'm going to say console.log hello 2 colon, and we'll say name. Okay, so I'm going to say name, and we're putting name inside of these parameters where the function name is defined, and that means we have an extra piece of information that we can pass into a function when we call it. So now, let me go ahead and get rid of some of these. Now when you call this function, print hello 2, we can pass in a name with the parentheses, or with the function. So I'm going to say Tammy. And now if I hit save, it runs and it says hello 2 colon Tammy. And so you can say hello to different people now much easier. So I can print it again with like Edward or something. So print, and now, or refresh, and now we are calling this function with 2 different pieces of information. So the function looks different each time it's called with different pieces of information. So we're saying hello to Tammy and Edward now. So you can add parameters like this, which is pretty cool. So we can also, like what happens if we print hello 2 with no parameter passed in? It's going to give us hello 2 undefined. So that doesn't really work very well. So what can we do about that? Well, we can add in a default parameter with the equals sign. So we can say hello or name equals, and then mystery, or let's say stranger. So now when we refresh, it'll say hello to stranger. So you can have default values. So that's kind of cool. You can also add multiple parameters. So let's say we want to add 2 numbers together. Function add 2 nums. We'll say num1. You can use a comma, a series of commas to separate parameters. So num1 and num2, and then we have our body of the function. So I'm going to say console.log num1 plus num2, and then we can add 2 numbers together. So add 2 nums, 4 and 6. So refresh, we get 10. There's also situations where you don't want to have the first parameter, but you want to have the second parameter. So that's a little tricky, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to make another function, empty params, and we're going to give it 3 parameters. And we're just going to log them out. Console.log, first, second, and third. Okay, and let's run these at the beginning. So I'm going to just give it a, well, you know what? I'm going to move it at the end. And then, okay, so this will be where we're starting from this point on. Well, in this function section at least. So we've got empty params, and if I call empty params, let's just say hello, pi, and good, and just 3 random words. So we're calling this function with these 3 parameters. So we print it out, and it says, you know, it just logs them out. So what if we are missing the first parameter? Well, you can't just like leave it out. It's going to give us an error, but you can give it an undefined. If you print it, it's going to say hello first undefined. So that's one way. Another way is you can set a, like, I don't know where it comes from, but I've seen it sometimes. I think it's underscores, which is a package that we may talk about later, but it's just a little package. And what we can do is we can say let, and then an underscore is equal to the value of undefined. And then now that gives us the ability to run empty params and an underscore anytime we want to have a value, like anytime we don't want to use that parameter. So I'm going to save, refresh, and now we get first undefined, second undefined, and then third is the value that we're using. And then the better way, most of the time, is to have an object be the parameter. That way you can just check to see whether the property on that object exists. So let's make another function. I'm going to call this, I'm going to actually copy and paste this. Empty params with obj. So now we're just going to have one, and it's going to be called my obj. So we're going to pass in an object as a parameter. So first will just be my obj.first, my obj.second, and my obj.third. And so now we don't have to do any of this shenanigans of passing in unused things. We can just call the function and the property just won't exist. So I think it's a lot simpler and it's a lot shorter because you can see we don't have 3 parameters. We only have 1. So I'm going to call this function empty params with obj, and I'm going to pass in an object. So I'm going to say first, it's going to be dude, and then second will be undefined. Well, actually, we won't even need to put second on here. We'll just say third. Do. Okay, so my obj.second doesn't exist. It's undefined. So let's see what happens. We'll save this, refresh, and we get first dude, second undefined, third dude. So we can see that we get the same result, and it's a little bit cleaner. And this would be even cleaner if we actually set the object to a const. So we'd say something like const my second obj equals, and then first. So that would actually be cleaner, but hopefully hopefully you understand the point. Okay, so let's close out this function basics, and then we're going to make a new file. We're going to call inside of our functions file folder, and we're going to call it return and side effects.js. And then in our index, we're going to comment out the function basics. I'm going to copy it, and we're going to import the return and side effects.js file. Okay, so in here, we're going to return stuff out to the main code from within our function. So let's make an empty variable called result. So let result, and then here we're going to make a function with a side effect. So a side effect is basically changing something outside of the function. So right now result is undefined, but we have a new function called add with side effects, and we're going to give it 2 parameters, num1 and num2, and this function is going to change the value of result. So result is going to equal num1 plus num2. So now we can, let's also console log. Well, let's console log result now. So console.log result. Okay, so now if I refresh, we get, oh, interesting, result is undefined. Oh, that's because I didn't call this function. Okay, so let's actually run this function, add with side effects. We're going to run this function with 4 and 8. So we're going to call add with side effects with 4 and 8. So 4 takes the place of num1, 8 takes the place of num2, and then we take num1 and num2, add them together, and store that in the value of result. So result becomes this 4 and 8, which is 12. So if we console log this, result should be 12. Okay, so we get result 12. This is a side effect. We've changed something outside of this function from inside the function. So this isn't good. There's a better way to do this. So let's try it again with a different variable called const result2. Remember, const, you can't change them. So we're going to say const result2 equals, I actually need to make a new function. So I'm going to say function add purely. Add purely. We're going to say num1, num2. And this time we're going to return a value. So I'm going to say return num1 plus num2. Okay, and so now we're going to say const result2 is equal to the result of calling this function. So I'm going to say add purely, and we're going to give two numbers. I'm going to say 12 and 15 this time. So now what happens? We're going to run this through line by line, but let's just take a look at what happens first. So it's also console.log result2, save, refresh. Okay, so result2 colon 27, and this is on line 17. So line 17, it says result2 is equal to the value, or we're printing out result2 colon and then the value of result2. So what is the value of result2? It is the result of calling this add purely function with the parameters 12 and 15. So what we're doing is we're calling this function with 12 and 15. So you can swap these out with these numbers. So num1 is 12 plus 15 is 27, and then we're returning that out of add purely. We're spitting it out of add purely, and we're basically spitting it out here. So we're saying result2 is equal to the result of calling this function. This is the result, the return value. So the return value is 27, so you can basically swap 27 out with this and store it in result2. So this is the better way to do it because we're not changing anything outside of the function from inside of the function. We're just spitting out a value and then letting the outside part of the code do whatever we want with it. So we're taking 27 and we're storing it in result2. It's different than changing the value of result inside of the function. So you want to do things purely when you can. So hopefully that makes sense, but this is the difference between a function with a side effect and a pure function where you're simply returning a value out to the outside world. So this is the way you want to do it. The next thing we're going to talk about is scope. So let's go ahead, it's separate enough to make a new file out of this. So let's go ahead and close this. I'm going to copy and paste, comment the old one, and we're going to call this new file scope-basics.js. So then we'll add a new file, scope-basics.js, in the functions folder. So here we can start talking about scope. So I'm going to make a variable called flavor. I'm going to say equals chocolate. And so this is a variable in the global scope. Functions have their own scope. So I'm going to make a function called I like pie, and I'm going to say console.log I like pie scope colon and then flavor. And then we're going to call this function. So I like pie, and save, refresh, and we get I like pie scope chocolate. So we look in here, we don't have the variable of flavor inside of this function here. But I like pie can access it because the global scope is available everywhere in the program. So I like pie has access to this flavor. And I like pie has its own scope as well. So we can actually overwrite this flavor by just saying let flavor equals key lime, or whatever flavor you want to add. And so now if we run I like pie, we get key lime. But then down here, if we run flavor, so flavor in global, we'll hit save, refresh, and we get chocolate again. So it's chocolate out here, and it's key lime in here. But something to keep in mind is because we're redefining flavor, or we're defining the variable flavor inside of I like pie, it's going to completely override it. So if we try to do something like this, where console.log is above the variable that it's using, if we refresh, it's going to say uncaught reference error, cannot access flavor before initialization. Because in here, flavor is defined, but it's in an entirely separate scope. So what's happening is in the function scope, it's identifying all the variables to declare, and it sees flavor in the function scope being defined. And because the flavor variable is going to be defined in the function, that variable name sort of gets reset within the function. And because of that, it now needs to be initialized before it can be used. And here we're trying to use it here before it's actually initialized. Okay, and I want to just make sure we have an example of each situation. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this function, a total of 4. So we have a total of 4. And so this one is the one that is broken. So I'm going to call this I like pie broken. And then I like pie. This one has the global scope, or the function scope. And then, so let flavor, we're redefining flavor inside the function. And then this one will be the global scope. So we'll just get rid of the flavor altogether inside the function. We'll just borrow from the global scope here. And then I want to make this one a param, or have a param called flavor. So we can just borrow or use the parameter that gets passed in. So let's give this a try. We're going to say I like pie broken, and we're going to call I like pie function scope, and then I like pie, and then we'll call this one I like pie 2, and so I like pie 2, and I like pie 2 takes a flavor, so I'm going to say, I don't know, blueberry. And then the one with the flavor, we're going to get rid of the initialization of a variable. So I think I got everything I need. Let's actually change this to I like pie global. I like pie global. And then I like pie 2 should be parameter. So param. I like pie param. Okay, so the explanation is kind of in the function name. So function scope is grabbing the flavor from the scope of the function. So this one will come out as key lime, and then this one's broken because it is trying to use a variable that doesn't exist yet. And then this one doesn't have anything defined, so it's using the scope from the global flavor, or the global scope flavor. And then this one is using the flavor value of the parameter that's passed in the argument. So if we save this and refresh, we get key lime, chocolate, blueberry, and then the break. And let's actually move that down at the very end so we can get everything working. So the next thing I want to talk about is callback functions. So I'm going to make a new file in the functions folder. We're going to call it callback.js. And then in our index.html, we're going to copy and paste the script. We're going to comment out the scope basics, and we're going to add in the callback.js. Okay, so there we go. And we've got an empty callback file here. So basically, a callback function is the ability to pass in a function to something else. So let's create a function, multiply two nums. Oops, I spelled 2 wrong. So num1, num2. And then here we can just return num1 times num2. Okay, and then let's make another function called add12 to sum. So we're going to give num1, num2, and then we're going to add 12 to it. So num1 plus num2 plus 12. So we actually have the ability to pass these functions in to other functions and call them at a later time. So a function doesn't get called until you add the parentheses to the end of the function name. So what we can do is we can actually pass in the function and without the parentheses. So let's give that a try. Let's say we want to repeat ourselves 5 times. So we want to do something 5 times. We'll make this function called do something 5 times. Okay, and then we will pass in a function. So we're going to give this a parameter named func. And then the function that we're going to be passing in takes 2 arguments. So we're just going to pass in some arguments. So arg1, arg2. And then we can console.log the function by itself. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to say do something 5 times. So this calls this function, and then it console.logs the func that was passed in. So if we do this, nothing. Oops, what happened here? Oh, I have to drag in the index.html file again. Okay, so we get undefined because we're not passing anything into func, but this is supposed to be a function. I mean, I could call this elephants if I wanted to, but func makes more sense. So what function do we want to pass in? Let's say I want to multiply 2 nums. I want this to be the function. So if I save this, I refresh, and now we see that we're spitting out a function multiply 2 nums. And that's because we're just printing the function. We're not actually running the function, we're just printing the function body and the name. So again, to actually call the function, you have to add parentheses to it. So this will actually call the function. So we've passed in multiply 2 nums. Let's go ahead and add a console.log in the multiply 2 nums to say I am in multiply 2 nums. Save, refresh. So now when we run it, it says I am in multiply 2 nums on line 2. So this function here is actually getting run right here. because again, we're passing it in. So func now has the value of multiply two nums. And then it gets called, so this function gets called when we add parentheses to the end of this, because this is storing this function inside of it. So this function has two parameters. So we can actually add parameters into this function to call it with these parameters. So let's add some parameters, 4 and 6. So we'll save, refresh, 24. Okay, so multiply two nums, num1 times num2, 4 times 6 is 24. So that's why we're getting 24. And then if we want to pass in parameters from out here, we can do that as well. That's why we have these arg1 and arg2 here. So I could say arg1, arg2, and then this do something 5 times here takes in two other parameters, which are supposed to be numbers. And they're supposed to be numbers because multiply two nums is in the value of func, and multiply two nums takes two numbers. So we need to pass in two numbers. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to say 2 and 12. Well, let's make it 13. So now if I save this, I refresh, we get 26. 2 times 13, 2 times 13 is 26. So hopefully that makes sense. And then if we want to do this function 5 times, to actually make this function name accurate, we can just copy and paste this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, save. Refresh. Now we get this function being run 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the cool thing about this is this makes this function here a little bit more reusable. So if I want to add 12 to the sum, then I can do that 5 times as well, with much less code than if we were to not use this callback function. So let me just do add 12 to sum, and we'll add in, we're going to call, we're going to say do something 5 times. Do something 5 times, and then the function we're going to run 5 times is add 12 to sum. And then what numbers do we want to give? I don't know, we'll say 4 and 1. So that should work. Let's save it. Oh, you know what? And let's also add console.log. I am in add 12 to sum. Okay, save, refresh. Okay, so now we're very quickly able to run this function 5 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this function, this func here in this do something 5 times, is a different function depending on how the function is called. So here in do something 5 times, we're storing the multiply two nums into func and then calling it with 2 arguments. But in the second time we call do something 5 times, we're passing in a different function that also takes in 2 arguments. So this function here, add 12 to sum, is now stored in this func parameter, and then this function is actually called 5 times inside of this function. And again, it takes 2 parameters, which we are also passing into arg1 and arg2, and then using them in this function. So hopefully that makes sense. That is callback functions, and you're going to see it all over the place, so you're going to get used to it pretty quick, and I'll have some exercises to practice with. I want to talk about one more thing with functions, and that is returning functions with their own separate memory. So let's go ahead and copy the starter folder and then paste it into the main folder. We're going to rename it to nested hyphen and hyphen returning functions. Okay, and then we can drag and drop this index.html, here, and then close out the index, and then we'll just open up the script.js. Okay, so let's make a function. I'm going to say function increase jump height. Okay, and then I'm going to say let counter equals 0. And then we're going to add another function inside of this function. So I'm going to say function increment, and then we're going to increase the value of counter. Okay, and so now, just for fun, we're going to add a console.log. We'll do the backticks. You can now jump counter feet. Okay, and then return this function. And we're going to return it without the parentheses, because if we were to return it with the parentheses, we would end up calling this function and returning whatever it returns. It returns undefined, so it would be a little wonky. So let's make sure we return only the definition of the function. So we're going to store this function in whatever we return it to. So now that we have this function, we have the ability to create and use this function on different instances of either variables or objects. So what we can do is let's create a character object. I'm going to say const c1 equals, and then we can pretend this is a jumping game where they can level up. So I'll say level up, and we'll give it the increase jump height function, and then we'll give them a name. So I'll say their name can be Bob, and then I'll copy this and make another character of C2 and name this person Bobby. So now let's give it a try. Let's say C1 dot level up, and we want to call this function. So let's save and refresh, and interesting, we get nothing. So why do we get nothing? Well, let's look at level up. So we call the level up function, which is the increase jump height function. So if we run increase jump height, which is basically what we're doing when we call level up, we're just running increase jump height. And so we run this function, we set the let counter, and we create this function increment, and then we return this function. But that's it. We don't actually call this function. So what we need to do is we actually need to run the increase jump height function here when we're setting it to the property of level up. That way, because what we get, if we were to run this, we would get the return value put here, which would be this increment function with the counter variable here, with access to the counter variable. So what we can do is we can actually call this function. So now what we're doing is we're calling increase jump height here, and it returns the increment function. So this increment function gets returned out to level up. So now level up is still a function, but it's not the increase jump height function, it's the increment function from inside increase jump height. So now basically we have the increment function, and if we have an increment function, to call that function we need to use the parentheses. So here we have increased jump height. So now when we run a level up, we should be able to run this counter. So let's give it a try. We'll hit save, refresh, and it says you can now jump 1 feet. So let's add it again and again and again. Refresh, you can jump 1 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. So every time we call this, we're increasing the counter value and saying you can jump this many feet. So let's try to do C2 level up. Save. So now we get you can jump oops, what did we do wrong? Oh, here we go. We need to make sure that we call both of them. So if we refresh it, we get you can jump 1 feet, you can jump 2 feet, and then this is C2, so the counter starts over, because the counter is going to be different for each and every time this increased jump height function returns the increment function. If this is confusing, then rewatching the scope section might help. The function increment has access to its parent function's counter, but then that counter variable gets wrapped up and stashed away in the c1.levelup property. Every time c1.levelup is called, the same function as increment, then the counter that was wrapped up gets increased. And from what I understand, the increased jump height function gets released from memory to free up space, and then is recreated when it's needed again. So when we call increase jump height again, the counter is 0 again because the function is rebuilt. I'm not 100% sure on this though. I need to refresh my own memory, and I'll link to another video on memory management soon when I get to it. The next thing I want to talk about is object methods. So let's close everything out. Copy the starter folder, paste it, and rename the copy object methods. Okay, so now we can grab the index, drag it in here, hit enter, and then we're good to go. So this section is going to be a tiny bit different, and the reason is because we have a lot of code to cover. So instead, and I don't want to just spend a bunch of time typing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this giant, well, this 120 something lines of code and comments, and we're just going to walk through each and every line. I'm going to scroll from the top to the bottom, the very top to the very bottom, so you can type it all out if you want, or you can download this from the downloads file. So anyway, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to use the web to look at some of these things. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh. We can see we got a lot of stuff here. So the first thing is I wanted to talk about this string. So when we have data, we usually want to do things with that data. So our strings have functions on them, also known as methods, and we can use these methods or functions to do things. So for example, if we need to find out what the 18th character of this string is, we can do that. And so we have a couple different ways. We can do myString.char at, and then the index that we're looking for, or the position in the string that we're looking for. And there's two ways to do this, because my strings can or a string can also kind of function like an array, so we can use the same syntax to get the 18th position. And so if we look at that, we see it's S. And then also we look in our console and we see S. So we can get different elements at different positions of strings. We can also do that with arrays as well. So let's do a Google search for this. Just because we may not know what the function is right away or off the top of your head. So you'll want to be able to search this. So find element at position in string JavaScript. I just kind of figured, I just kind of made that up because it sounded like what I was looking for. So we have index of, and if you click on the Mozilla, we have index of. And so it talks about how to use it. And then if we go down to the bottom, we see also char at. And so if we click on that, this is another way that we can get to it. And there's examples on how to use it and everything. So this is the page that describes how to use char at. So anyway, we can also have a property on string. So if we want to find out how long the string is, we can enter the variable of this, or the variable name that contains the string, and then dot length. Or we could just do a string and then dot length, and we could get the length. So this string is 53 digits or 53 characters long, and we can see that here. And then you can also see if a string includes or has a specific pattern. So right here, we're just looking for Z. Does this string include Z? And so you can, just again do a Google search. Does string have character? And then the name of the language you're using, JavaScript. And it talks about the includes method. And then there's a Stack Overflow and a W3 Schools and a bunch of other things. And then finally, developer Mozilla string. Well, actually, that's the whole string page. Interesting. Okay. So let's see if there's includes in here. Okay. So yeah, so you gotta look around the web, but all of the information is there. And so these are all just different methods. So we've got index of to see how far in this specific pattern is. So this is the 24th element in the string, z is. And then we can also cut up the string into a list of words. And we can split the string by passing a pattern on which to split by. So if we have this dot split with a space here, it will split into a separate array element every time we see this pattern that has been passed in. So this, by using spaces, we're going to split each and every word into its own element in the array. And so we end up with, hello, I am a cool strings that talks about nothing. And then it does eliminate the spaces. But you could do this by O as well if you wanted. So it would be hell, I am, and it would have spaces. I don't know what it would do here, but you can always give it a try. And let's see here. If we need a small piece of the string, we can use slice. So this would start cutting at the 14th element and stop cutting at the 19th element, and we would end up with ool s. So 14, 19, this is about 14 to 19 characters in right here. So you can split the string, and then there's a ton of other different string methods available. So you can just type in string JavaScript, click on it, and then here's all the different methods that are available. And so just look through them and see if you can figure out or find what you need. So the next thing is it's not just strings that have like methods on them, it's also objects and all of the other data types as well. So my object here, we've created a sample object. And what if we need to see if this property has, or if this object has the property color on it? We could do something like my object or my obj dot has own property color, and then this would be a string with the contents of the property that we're looking for. So this prints false because we don't have anything like this. Oops, if I could spell right, color. We don't have that in this object, so it's going to print false. But does my object has own property year? Well, the year property is right here, so it would print out true. And then there's another way of writing. This will make more sense when we get into object-oriented programming in JavaScript, quote, quote, object-oriented. This get own property name, well, property names will print out all of the properties into an array. So we get make, model, and year because these are the properties, make, model, and year on this object. So those are just some of the object methods. And once again, we can just type in object methods, JavaScript. We can see this object page. And then here's all of the methods that are available. And so we can use these to build out our program. The next thing is creating an array. So arrays have a lot of methods on them. So I have a sample array with about 7 or so elements, and we can loop through an array with for each. There's actually multiple ways to loop through an array. So what you end up doing is you pass in a function into for each, And so you could do this a couple different ways. Actually, I should have done this you can define a function and then just pass it in. So this would be a good exercise for you. So I'm going to say animals.forEach, and then you would pass in a, my test function. And so you would create this my test function somewhere, and animals.forEach would use that function to loop through each array. So currently I have a function that just takes element and index, and it console.logs the element and the index. And if we look at this, you could also pass in one more element or one more parameter, which is the actual array itself. But I don't need that, so I'm not going to do that. And again, let's go to array JavaScript. Click on it. And then here's a bunch of methods. We have this for each method. And if we look at it, it shows us how to use it. So they're using an arrow function. But the parameters here are the callback function, the function to execute on each element, and the function is called with the following arguments. So we get element, index, and array. So element is the current element being processed. So the first time this function runs, it's going to be on cat, and then the element is going to be cat, and the index is going to be 0 because it's the very first element. The second time this function runs is going to be on dog, element's going to be dog, index is going to be 1, all the way through until the end of the array. And that's how this for each function works. And so you can see the third parameter is the array that the for each was called upon. And I don't usually need to use that, so I'm not going to use it here, but this is just an example of how to use it. Another thing we can do is change the value of an element in an array. And just like with the strings, we can do the array.length to get the length of the array. You can add a new element to the end of an array. .push and fox will add fox to the end. So let's look around 74 to 76. If we look over here, 74. Okay, here we go. We have added fox. Okay, so that's kind of cool. And then if we 76. Oh, I think I need to refresh because I think I changed some lines. Okay, so we have fox on line 76, and then on 71, okay, we've added the length, so that's 8, and then 70, okay, so we push the fox on, and then we print out the array. At 76, so again, we have fox. So we see that we've added fox to the end of the array. And then we can also remove the last element from the array. So that just got rid of fox. So now we can see here, 81, fox is gone. We can remove an element first. We can remove the first element of an array with .shift. So if we look at line 85, we can see the cat has been removed. And then there's some other cool things like finding elements. Sorry if I'm going too fast here. So finding elements is another situation where we pass in a function. And this function here, it takes the element. So it looks at each and every element in the array. So the first time this runs, this is going to be, the first element, which will be, well, cat, unless it was removed. I think it has been. And then it would be the next element, and then the next element, and the next element, etc., until it reaches the end. So for one iteration, this would be cat, and then it would see, does the string cat include O? If it does, it returns true. Otherwise, it returns false. So we're looking here for a element that contains the letter O. And so if it finds it, then it stores it in this found element variable, because that that's the return value of find, and then we're storing that return value into this variable. And so you can see here there's shorthand and then there's longhand. This one is just a function, and then there's no return. And that's because when this is on a single line, it automatically returns. But if you need more complicated logic for your find, you can add curly brackets here, and then you just need to manually add the return. So again, this evaluates true or false. If the specific element being tested returns true, then the find element returns, or the find function returns this element. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, just play around with this as you're writing it out, or after you're writing it out. Okay, so the first element to contain O, let's take a look. I'm going to save and look at line 98. So 98, the first element to contain O is dog. So let's see if that is true. Cat and dog. So that works. Okay, and starting after the console log, the first element to contain O is found element. I did change some of the comments to make it easier to explain. So what we have is a splice, and this basically modifies the array. So the first thing I did is logged the animals array before splicing. And so at this point we get dog, cow, fish, shark, humpback, ant, cricket. And so the next thing we did was splice with a parameter. The first parameter is 2, the second one is 1. And so you can check the documentation for splice, and I already have it pulled up here. But the first element of splice, so it changes the contents of the array by removing or replacing existing elements and or adding new elements in place. And we get the first index, the first parameter is the index at which to start changing the array. The second one is to how many elements in the array to delete. And then the next following parameters, you can add as many as you want, are the elements to add to the array beginning from the start index. So if we look at that in our example, this 2, 1 starts deleting at index 2. What is index 2? It's fish. So it's 0, 1, 2, fish, and we delete a total of 1. So we're going to delete fish. So we end up with the array dog, cow, shark, humpback, ant, cricket. The next thing I wanted to do was a splice 1, 2, and then add these parameters here to add more elements to the array. So what happens here, the step 0, let's print out the current array. So we get dog, cow, shark, humpback, ant, cricket. And then step 1, start deleting at index 1, which is 0, 1. So we delete cow, and we delete a total of 2. So cow and shark get deleted. So after that step, the current array is dog, humpback, ant, cricket. And then the next step is adding the following parameters starting at index 1. So index 1 is now where humpback is. So 0, 1. So this is where X, Y, Z, and A all get added. So we add X, Y, Z, A to the array starting at index 1, which means we end up with dog, X, Y, Z, A, humpback, ant, cricket. So that's how splice works. And then we have a log at the end to see the end of it, or so to see the full array after doing the splice. And then the next thing is filtering an array. So this filter takes in a function very similar to how the find worked. And the first parameter, which we've called word, you can name this anything you want. You could call it elephant, it doesn't matter. It represents the element in the array. And so because it's an array of words, we chose the word word. And then the second part, after the equals and caret, is the test function. So if the result of this test is true, that means the element is part of the returned array. So here we're running our test. Does the current word include the letter A? If it does, then return it out to elements with A. If it doesn't, then discard it. Like, we're not deleting the element from the array, but we're not going to return it out to elements with A, which is our variable. So basically we just run this function on every element in the animals array. So, and not this array anymore, but the array that we currently have, which is this one. So dog, XYZ, A, humpback, ant, cricket. So after running the filter, we should get the elements with A, which will be all of the elements in the animals array that have the letter A in it. And then I did another one with the longhand version. Again, if you need more complicated logic for your filter, you can add brackets, and then you would just have to manually return true or false. So that's basically how that works. And then if we're trying to find elements without the A, then we say if not words that includes A, return true. So that's where we're storing all the elements without A in this elements without A variable, and then we can print out that variable, or that array. So let's take a look at it, and let's actually print the full array one more time. Okay, and let's take a look. So refresh, elements with A, we get A, humpback, ant. Elements without A, dog, X, Y, Z, cricket. And then the full one is dog, X, Y, Z, A, humpback, ant, cricket. So dog, X, Y, Z, A, humpback, ant, and then cricket. So all of the elements are accounted for. Some of them go with A, some of them do not have A. And so that's how we're able to filter. And again, if you need help with the filter, you don't need to watch my video. You can just look up filter JavaScript, and it'll show you how to use the filter function. And so I recommend you play around with it and read the documentation, try some of their examples. And that is object and array and string methods. And the thing I want to get across to you is that each data type has its own set of functions that you can run, and you can use all of those functions to do a lot of really cool stuff with your code. The next thing we're going to talk about is traversing, or not traversing, but doing some DOM manipulation. So we're going to, I'll copy the starter folder one more time, and we're going to paste it into our main project folder, and we're going to rename this DOM. Okay, and then we're going to drag and drop the index.html in here, and this time we're actually going to do some stuff to the index.html page. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some p tags around this sentence here, and then we're going to copy it twice, and then I'm going to give this middle one an ID of notice me, and then we're going to save. Okay, and so we have 3 now, and the ID hasn't done anything yet, but we can actually use this ID to grab it and manipulate it with JavaScript. So inside of our JavaScript code, we're going to set that paragraph tag, or that specific paragraph element, into a variable, and then we're going to manipulate it. So I'm going to say const p tag equals document dot get element by ID notice me, and so we're getting the element by the ID. And so the ID is notice me. So if we see here, this ID is notice me. So that means grab this element because it has the same matching ID. So we'll grab it, and then we can do stuff to this p tag. So the p tag has a style property which has the information on how it's supposed to look. So we have things like font size that we can change. So I'm going to change the font size to 44 pixels. Save, refresh. Oh, and what happened? Okay, so the problem, I'm pretty sure, is the script tag is above the paragraph tag. Or way back in the order matters video or section, we talked about how the order of the script loading matters, or when it matters, or when it loaded. It needs to load after the things that it relies on have been created. So if we move this down to the bottom, this should fix that. Refresh, and okay, we are back in business. Okay, so we've changed the font size. We can also change, any of the style attributes. So style dot background, say hot pink. Refresh, and now we've got a hot pink background. So that's cool. The next thing I want to do is make a button, and we're going to run a function when the button is pressed. So I'm going to say function change BG, so which stands for background. And I'm just going to say console.log change BG clicked, exclamation point. Okay, and so now we need to have something to click in our HTML. So underneath the paragraph tags, I'm going to make an input. I'm sorry, not an input. I'm going to make a button. And we're going to have an well, let's do the on click in a minute. So right now, this is just a regular old button. So we'll say this change backgrounds. Save. And we get this button here that does nothing. But the button has an on-click attribute. So on-click, what do you want to happen? And so I'm going to insert a change BG function. So this change BG, because it has parentheses, this is the function. So it's going to run when the button is clicked. So if we go over here, we have this change BG. So if we save everything and open up our dev tools, we hit the change backgrounds button, and change BG clicked, the log will show up in the console. So now we know that our function is running, but it's not actually changing the background color. So let's do some things that it needs to do in order to change the background color. So the first thing is, if we want the user to be able to choose the color, we need to be able to give them an input so they can enter in the color that they want to change the background to. So let's now go ahead and add an input. So I'm going to go into our index.html, and I'm going to type in input with a type of text, name of background hyphen input, and an ID of background hyphen input, and then close out the input, save, and now we have an input field that we can type into. So now we can, just like we did with this PID, we can grab the input and then we can get the value from it. So in here, change BG, I'm going to say const color equals, and we're going to get the element by ID. So document.get element by ID, background input, And then we can't just get the background input, we actually have to get the value from it. So if I type in that, and let's console.log this. So console.log color, and then color, and refresh. We're gonna get change backgrounds. We're gonna get the whole element. We don't want the whole element. We just want the value of it, and it has a value property that actually has the contents of the text field. So if I go dot value, then we can see the actual contents that the user's typed in. So if we refresh, we get this content that the user has typed in. So now we can go grab the body of the HTML document and change its background color to the color that the user has inputted. And so we could add an ID to the body tag, but there's only supposed to be one body tag in a document, at least as far as I'm aware. So we can just you can use a different function on the document to grab the body tag. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to say document.getElements by tag name. And this was useful if you want to get all the p tags or whatever. So in this case, we're going to get technically all the body tags, but there's only one body tag and it returns an array. And so we only want the first element. So from the first element, or we're going to take the first element, the body tag, the only element, and we're going to change its style.background to the color that the user has inputted into the document, or into that field. So from here, we can save. Let's go over here and refresh, and we'll type in yellow and hit change backgrounds. And all of a sudden, our background is changed to yellow. We can type in yellow green. You can type in a hex color. I forget if I've covered that or not, but 00FF00 change. Okay, so we have this working. And just to give you a little bit of variety, let's do one more thing. Let's make one more function, and we're going to add a new p tag. So we're going to call this function add new p tag. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a const new p, and it's going to say document.createElement. So we can create new elements. And so I'm going to create an li element, list item, and this list item can have an inner text, or most tags can have inner contents, so inner text or inner HTML. So I'm going to say new p.inner HTML equals I like pie, do you like pie? Question mark. And then from here, we're going to say document.getElements by tag name. We're going to grab the body again. And we're going to, again, because elements by tag name returns an array, we only want the first body tag, even though it's the only one. And we're going to say append child. And this will insert a child element into the body, and we have to tell it what we're going to insert. And so we've already created this element here, so let's just put it into the body. So this is the element, the one that we just created is the one that we're going to append. So we stored that in a new p variable, const. So I'm going to say new p, save, and then now we just need a way to run this function. So I'm going to go back to our HTML, and I'm just going to create another button. So button on click equals, and then add new p tag, parentheses, and then the name of the button. So add another p tag, and then close the button. We'll save, refresh, and then now we get this add another p tag. And so if I click it, it adds a list item. So you can kind of see here how we could make a to-do list now. Like, we have pretty much everything we need to create a to-do list. So yep, and that is it for the DOM. This concludes the fundamentals of JavaScript, but there's still quite a bit more that you'll want to know. You'll want to be comfortable with promises and async await, and we'll want to cover the basics of Node.js. And finally, you'll want a good understanding of object-oriented concepts in JavaScript, such as how the this keyword works, the prototype chain, and classes. We have tutorials on these topics, so be sure to click on the links in the description to check those out. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to our channel and click the bell to be notified when we release new tutorials. Also, be sure to like the video and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Lastly, check out the link or links in the description. We usually create a blog post to go with the tutorial, and we might have a newsletter or course or something to check out as well. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.